Welcome to week 5 of the Freedom Ticket. This week we're going to be talking about sourcing, and we got a lot of really cool stuff coming your way about actually once you found a great product opportunity, where are you going to get it made? What are you going to do? How are you going to get this from the factory all the way to Amazon? In this module, I want to actually give you some ideas of actually where to source your products, some websites that you can use, some trade shows that you can go to, some different fairs that you can go to. But in this module, you'll notice there's a handout down at the bottom that's kind of like a map of China. So I want you to take a look at that handout, download that handout, and it kind of breaks up everything by region. Because in China, especially if you're sourcing from China, there's certain regions that specialize in certain products. And so if you're dealing with a factory and they're making, say, a kitchen product, but they're in a region that's known more for sports and outdoors, there's probably something not quite right about that, because typically factories group themselves in geolocations within China because all the raw materials and all the supply chain is all right there. So if there's a factory that's in a region that it shouldn't be, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad factory. It could be totally fine, but it's a red flag that you need to check out. It might be a trading company. It might be someone that's saying they can do something that they've never done before because they need some extra business. So just be careful of that. So download that directory that's here in this module and take a look at that and make sure that the factories, that when you do start talking to them, are in the proper regions. Now, another thing people often ask about are, should I use a factory, or should I use a trading company, or should I use a sourcing agent? And that just depends. There's advantages and disadvantages to each one. In China, a lot of the factories don't speak very good English. They might have one or two recent college graduates that speak some pretty good English, and they will interface with the Western world. But a lot of factories just simply don't have anybody that really speaks good English, or they're not comfortable with it, so they use trading companies. In some factories, they just don't want to deal with all the riffraff. They don't want to deal with all these people that have taken an Amazon course and saying, hey, can you make me 100 or something, or 500 or something, and all these inquiries that they get. They just don't want to deal with that, so they rather just have that go through a trading company. So sometimes trading companies can be very, very good. And I've even seen in some cases where trading companies actually have a lower price than the actual factory. And so the trading company is not always a bad thing. Now, when you're looking at trading companies, one of the things you want to consider is, what does this trading company represent? If they're got a hodgepodge, if they look like a Walmart on their website of all these different things that they're carrying, that's probably not a trading company you want to deal with, because they're just reaching for straws and will grab anything they can. But that trading company specializes in a niche. They specialize in the pet niche, or they specialize in the sports and outdoor niche or beauty niche. That's probably a much better trading company that you might want to consider dealing with. Now, sourcing agents are people who can actually help you with the process, and there's companies like Sourcify or sourceinasia.com. You can find sourcing agents at the EWU Market or at Canton Fair or some of the other places. Sometimes you can find them online through like Upwork, or even sometimes on Alibaba. But sourcing agents can be sometimes really good, and sometimes they can be not so good. Sometimes the sourcing agents are tied into a factory and they get some kickbacks from a factory. Other times sourcing agents are great, and they'll do all the cold calling on Alibaba for you. A lot of times there's some really good factories that actually aren't on Alibaba, and they may know them from their past experience that they can contact or through their network. And so a sourcing agent can oftentimes help you in a lot of ways if you want to go that route. But in the beginning, it's not too hard to actually do it yourself. But once you start growing, you might actually want to bring on someone that's doing a lot of that sourcing for you. Sourcing agents can also collect all your samples. They can actually do some of your inspections for you. And they can help coordinate some different things. So sourcing agents in some cases can be worth it. Typically they operate either on a flat fee basis, or they get a percentage of your orders. And so if you place a $10,000 order, they might get 3% of that. So they get $300 for their services, or they might just charge a flat fee or a combination of the two. So that's typically how they work. But there's also a lot of really good websites that you can use without even leaving your couch to actually source. Alibaba and AliExpress are two of the biggest, owned by the same company. 1688 is another one that's all in Chinese. That's also owned by Alibaba, but that's actually meant more for the local Chinese market in China. But sometimes the pricing there is actually for the exact same thing is different than it is on Alibaba, so that's another place that you can check. Alibaba doesn't just represent China. They have manufacturers from all over the world, including the US. It's primarily Chinese manufacturers, but you can find other manufacturers there. AliExpress is Alibaba's version of their website that's more for smaller orders. So when you need 1 or 5 or 10 of something, that's more of AliExpress. So the pricing is going to be higher than it would be on Alibaba. Alibaba offers a lot of features that a lot of people like trade assurance. That's where you can actually pay through Alibaba through like an escrow, and they don't release the money to the factory until you've kind of like signed off and received the goods and said, hey, this is all right. Alibaba offers inspection services. They offer a whole range of things. And Alibaba's tied into Helium 10. So as you're doing your searching on Helium 10, up in the X-ray tool, you can hit the little button and it can actually see things instantly and get an idea of the pricing on those sites. Just remember, whatever pricing you see on Alibaba is often not the final price. So sometimes you'll see on the web page a price, and sometimes it's lower and sometimes it's higher than that. So those are just ballpark estimates. So don't consider that the actual be the price. It's just to give you an idea. If you don't want to source in China, another place to actually take a look is IndiaMart.com. IndiaMart.com is a great resource for sourcing in India itself. And then on conventions, if you want to actually go to some of the conventions out there, there's a couple websites that are really good for that. 10times.com has a list of conventions all over the world for different subject matters, as well as the TSNN, the Trade Show Network. They've got a list of trade shows worldwide that can be a great resource for finding potential shows to go to or exhibitor lists where you could actually source manufacturers. Other sites that are really good are like Global Sources. Global Sources, they also put on a trade show in Hong Kong twice a year. Global Sources is typically a little bit higher quality. Alibaba doesn't quite vet their manufacturers as much as Global Sources. So Global Sources is a little bit more picky on who they take on their platform. And so you'll typically find a little bit higher quality factory on Global Sources. Another great site is 52WMB. 52W, that's W like a woman, M like Mary, B like boy, 52WMB. That's another great site where you can actually find sourcing from all over the world. You can do filtering for like South America, for Asia, for Europe. So that's another one to check out. There's also trade shows like in the United States, the ASD Source Direct show that's held twice a year in Las Vegas. Can be a great place where manufacturers from Korea and Asia and Eastern Europe and India, they all come in and they have booths there. So that can be a great place to actually find stuff. That's the ASD show itself is not so great. That's more for wholesale, but they do have a little section called Source Direct. So that's the one that you would actually want to go to. In China itself is the Yiwu Market, and that's spelled Y-I-W-U. The Yiwu Market is a year-round market. I think it's only closed like 2 days a year. And that market is like 7 buildings. It's like, I think something like 60 or 70,000 booths, little 10 by 10 booths. And it's a really good commodities market. It's not good for big, huge things, but for little small things, you can go there and you can get lost. It's best to have a guide if you go there. But they also have a website called Yiwu Go that's really good. And in a later module in this section, we're going to actually have someone show you exactly how to use Yiwu Go, which is their website, and you can actually virtually visit a lot of these booths from your home without having to get on a plane and go to China. The Canton Fair is another really big show in China that's held twice a year. They've been doing it for decades, and this show is over like 5 different halls, and it's huge. It's so big they have to set up tents and stuff outside, and then there's a lot of little peripheral trade shows that happen around the Canton Fair as well. That's a great place to go and find new products and even meet some of your manufacturers that maybe you've been dealing with after you've been selling for a while. There's also a lot of U.S. trade shows that are good. You can Google your industry and trade shows. So if you're selling beauty products, Google beauty trade shows in the USA or beauty trade shows in Europe, and you can come across a lot of really cool trade shows that way. A lot of times too, on the trade show websites, they'll have a directory of all the previous exhibitors. And so sometimes you can actually, without even going to the trade show, you can actually see who is exhibited at past shows or at the current show. And a lot of times there's a link to their website or an email address or a contact, and you can do some sourcing and finding out suppliers that way as well. Another great place is the Private Label Manufacturers Association show that's held in Chicago every year. And that's a show strictly for private label. And you can actually go there and you can actually find some pretty cool stuff too. There's lots of industry-specific shows like for beauty, Cosmoprof, which is held in Las Vegas every year. And then I think they also hold one in a couple other places in Europe and Asia, I think, as well. That's a huge show for anything to do with beauty, beauty packaging, the whole beauty industry. It's a really big show. In the pet industry, there's like the Pet Expo that happens in Orlando, and then Super Zoo that happens in Las Vegas. Those are really, really good shows. Also in the U.S., there's the Thomas Directory. It used to be a big. I remember 30 years ago, I had to go to the library and actually these big green books. And you check them out and you look in there to find a manufacturer. This is the days before the internet. I'm dating my age. But now that whole thing is online, and you can search for U.S. manufacturers. Just keep in mind that U.S. manufacturers are not too keen on doing small quantity runs. If you call them and say, I want 100 or something or 500 or something, a lot of them are not even going to return your phone call. Versus in China, they will. So keep that in mind. The Thomas Directory, they typically, U.S. manufacturers typically want bigger runs. Another thing to keep in mind is if you're doing anything that's a topical that goes on the skin or anything that's edible, I highly recommend you don't source those from Asia. I would be getting anything that goes on the skin from the USA or from Europe. I mean, South Korea would be okay for some topicals, or Japan, but I would not deal with anything in Southeast Asia for topicals. In edibles, make sure those are from legitimate places as well. There's a lot of liability there. There's a lot of strange ingredients, and that goes for both human and pets. So I would be careful on that. Another thing a lot of people often say is, hey, when I'm placing an order, I just want to test something out. I just want to, I think I found something on Amazon that's going to work. I just want to do a little test run. I don't want to order 1,000 of these. I just want to order like 50 of them and see what happens, see if this works. Me personally, I highly don't recommend that. I think that's a waste of time and a waste of money. The only time I think that testing makes sense is if it's a brand new product. If you just found you were on vacation in Guatemala and you just stumbled across some woodmaker shop that makes these really cool bird houses, and they're not on Amazon, you're like, Lou, man, I think these would crush it on Amazon. Then sure, buy a handful of those off of Amazon, or buy some from somebody on Etsy, and try selling those and just see what happens. Make sure there's demand. But if it's already being sold on Amazon, the tools in helium-10, you already have enough data to know whether this should work or not. So I'm a fan of go all in. If it already exists, the demand is already there. Only test when you're not sure if it's something that's brand new to the market. Then you might want to consider testing. Because what happens is if you test when the demand's already there, you're losing valuable time, and more people are going to come into that market. There's other people using the X-ray tool. There's tens of thousands of people using that tool. Other people are going to stumble across the same thing as you did, and all you're doing is putting yourself further back in the line. And so I'm not a big fan of doing that. There's also some really cool websites where you can find out what's being imported into the United States. Some of these are pay sites, and you got to pay $300 to $500 a month for them. But there's one called Import Dojo that, as of right now, is totally free. They may be asking for some contributions at some point, but what they do is anything that's imported into the United States is public record. So anything that comes in by ship to the U.S. is public record, and anybody can access the data. So what these companies do is they get this data from customs in the U.S. and they format it in such a way that you can search it. So if you want to know who's bringing in ab rollers, you can type in ab rollers in one of these databases, and it'll show you all the companies that are bringing in ab rollers, where it's coming from, which port, who the manufacturer is, what the factory is. In a lot of cases, these are Amazon sellers. You can actually match up the name to their name on Amazon, and you can see exactly you can spy on your competition and see exactly how much they're bringing in and who their factory is. So that's another thing that I look at. Another thing that when sourcing too is one of the big questions I ask all my factories is, do you sell on Amazon? And if the factory says, yes, we have a brand and we sell on Amazon, I usually will not use that factory. Because that factory, if they already sell on Amazon themselves under their name or another brand, they're likely to actually do some things that would not be advantageous to you. They may actually make your product a little bit lesser quality. They may at any point just say, hey, you're taking over sales from us. We're going to cut you off, go find another factory. So if your factory actually sells on Amazon itself directly, I usually will try to find another factory. But as far as those import databases, Import Dojo is a great one that's for free. As of right now, there's also one called Panjiva or Import Genius or ImportData.com. Those are all websites that have these what's called a bill of lading. So when a shipment comes in, everything has to be, it's kind of like a big invoice. Everything has to be documented, and you can see everything: weights, price they paid, where it came from, how much they're bringing in. And so those are some valuable resources to do reverse engineering to find out where things are coming from, or where your supplier, where your competition are getting things, or to even find factories. So those are some things I want to emphasize here. Now let's talk a little bit more about some more specifics about sourcing. So when you're dealing with your factory, you always want to get product samples from them. And they're usually going to charge you an arm and a leg for these samples. I mean, you would think that they would just give them out for free because they want your business, but they get so many people contacting them all the time that they actually will charge you. And it's usually, sometimes it's a small fee for the sample, but usually it's for the shipping. And it's usually a DHL charge can be $50 or $100. But what you can do is if they do that, is you can say, yo, that's fine, I'll pay that. And sometimes they'll take it by PayPal. Sometimes they may ask you to wire it. But usually they'll take the smaller sales like that by PayPal, and you can, or you can use Alta or one of the other methods from Helium 10 if you want to actually pay them. Sometimes they'll even take a credit card. But you can, what you can do is you can ask them to actually credit that against your invoice. So you can say, yeah, I'll pay the $100 for the sample, but if I end up going with your factory, let's deduct that $100 from my first invoice. And oftentimes they'll do that. You're usually going to want to get samples from 3 to 5 different factories. And once you've actually found the sample that you want, just remember that these samples are going to be, they're going to be the pristine ones. They're going to be dusted off. They're going to be the best quality that they get because they really want your business. They're not going to just grab something off the floor that's all dusty and send it to you. If they do, you don't want that factory. So once you actually get the actual sample, and you should have them actually make it customized to you. If they're actually going to embroider your logo on the side, actually have them embroider your logo on the side so you can actually see what it looks like. And once you get the final sample, you're going to want to get at least 2 copies of it if possible. Sometimes they won't do that. 1 copy will be okay, but try to get 2 copies if you can. That way you can send one to your inspection company. So when your inspection company goes and actually makes an inspection of the production run, they have the sample that you basically approved, and they can compare the final product to that. That's what I would highly recommend. Another thing you can do is you can order from you should always order from your competition on Amazon. So whoever your top 3 to 5 competitors are on Amazon, you should actually order their product and actually see exactly what they're doing, how they're doing their packaging, how they're doing their product inserts. And a lot of times you can reverse engineer, like what I talked about earlier on Import Dojo. You can actually find out who their factory is and who their manufacturer is. In some cases, it may be the same one you're talking to, or if not, you can actually Google that factory's name or look them up in Alibaba and contact them and say, hey, I'd like you to make products for me as well. So always get those product samples. Also, you can always negotiate the price with a Chinese supplier. So whatever price they give you is not always the final price. They're going to judge you, and they're going to decide how sophisticated you are based on your email correspondence with them, and they're going to decide what the price is going to be, and there's often a lot of wiggle room in there. So when you negotiate the price with them, though, make sure they're not actually cutting corners, because let's say your product has a zipper on it, and maybe it's a metal zipper is what you want, and they say, no problem, Mr. Kevin, we can lower your price by 10 cents. But what they do is they take that metal zipper and make it a plastic zipper. So you got to make sure that they're not cutting corners like that when you negotiate, but the prices are negotiable. And a lot of times you'll see as you increase your quantities, in China especially, the prices don't go down a whole lot, but you can negotiate that. And so always keep in mind everything is negotiable in China, and they may play hardball with you, but you can play hardball right back. Always check their certificates too of the factory. They'll make sure they have the right certificates, make sure they have the right social certificates, the right manufacturing certificates. And you can see some of that in the compliance module that Frederick did. And you can just ask them for their certificates and take a look at them and Google them and make sure they're actually legit. You also want to make sure they have the proper business license, that they're actually registered. You also want to make sure that they're licensed to export. Not all companies, manufacturers in China, have an export license. They're not able to actually export, and they have to go through a trading company to actually export. You also want to make sure that no matter what you do, you always inspect your goods. Always, always, always do an inspection. I'm going to show you an example of an inspection report in a future module. But even if it's just the first time, inspect. If it's the 100th time you dealt with this factory, inspect. I've known people who have lost tens of thousands of dollars because they decide I don't want to spend $200 on an inspection, and the product arrived in the U.S. and it's just pure garbage, and they have no recourse. A lot of times you can actually negotiate, and we'll talk about this when you're in creating the pro forma invoice. Actually ask the factory to if the inspection fails, you can say, look, factory, you're paying for the next inspection. And don't let the factory actually do their own inspection. It's great if they have those kind of people at the factory that can do that, but you always want an independent inspection that you're going by that's not related to the factory. It's not the factory owner's brother that's doing the inspection. So always do an inspection. Something else you should always do when you're asking for dealing with the factory is you should try to provide them with images of what you're looking for. These can be images you've grabbed off the internet. It could be pictures that you've taken of the product with your phone or something, but give them an idea of exactly what you're looking for. And if you want to make changes to it, if you have photos of the type of changes you want to make from another product, say I want to take this type of handle from this product and put it on this existing product, that will help them, especially because of the language barrier. They don't always understand everything. So when you're dealing with them, you want to make sure that you're speaking in plain English and very clear, and photos go a long ways in helping them with. You can even draw on the photos and make sure that they know exactly which part you're talking about. Another thing that I would do with any factory is I would Google them. Whatever their factory name is, I would actually Google them and make sure that they actually show up and check out their business website outside of Alibaba as well. Some other questions you might want to ask the factory is how large are they? How big are they? How many employees do they have? You want to make sure this is not two guys in their garage on the east side of Shanghai that's making this product for you, because it's probably not going to meet a lot of standards. It's going to probably be kind of a dirty place. So you want to know how big is the factory. It's not so important if they have 30 workers or 500, but you just need to have a gauge of how big is this factory. Another thing is how long have they been in business? How long have they been making this type of product? That's an important thing. There's factories in China that sometimes will make different products, and they change their name every month. They put up a new slate outside the door, depending on who's coming to visit. You want to make sure that they've been around a while and that they're totally legitimate. You also want to ask them what's their unit capacity. How many can they make? You know, if you're starting to order 1,000 and they say, yeah, it takes us 2 weeks to make 1,000 of your units. Well, what if you start going gangbusters on Amazon and you need 5,000 or 10,000 every month? They're not going to be able to keep up. So you need to ask them, I'm expecting to reach this point. Is that something that you guys will be able to handle? Or are you willing to buy the additional machines or hire the additional people to do it if we reach that point? Or should I have a backup factory or look for another factory? You also want to ask them, how much business development can they do? What's their skill set to actually modify the products or make adjustments to it or create new molds? You also want to know, do they sell on Amazon themselves? Like I mentioned earlier, that's a big red flag if they actually sell on Amazon. You can also ask them who are their best customers, and do any of their other customers sell on Amazon? And you might be surprised sometimes they'll actually tell you the exact name of those customers. You want to know, do they exhibit at trade shows? And if so, how do they determine what products they're going to show? Because you don't want them showing your products usually at a trade show. If they're going to the Canton Fair, you may not want your products up on the shelf for everybody to see. And other Amazon sellers that are passing by, they know exactly who your factory is. You may not want that, so you want to ask them those questions. You also want to ask them, what products do they specialize in? And do they have any extra capacity or do they partner with any other companies? Do they do their own packaging or do they outsource that? Another thing that you can ask them is like, hey, I've seen your website, or I saw you at the trade show and I saw what you have exhibited, but what do you have like behind the counter? What do you have over here that you haven't really shown everybody because you're afraid your competitors are going to copy you if you put it on your website? And a lot of times they may have the newest, coolest thing that nobody's seen on the market yet that they developed, and you might be able to be the first one to get it. So always ask them those questions as well. You also always want to ask them, are they a trading company or are they the actual factory? And then ask them, hey, can I come and visit you? Visits go a long way in Chinese culture. Chinese culture is a very face-to-face culture. So if you're ever over in China for a fair, or you just want to make a special trip to visit your factories, you'll be surprised how far that will go in actually getting you better prices, better terms, them showing you some of the cool new products that are reserved for only their best customers. So visiting your factory in person can be a major advantage, and these factories will roll out the red carpet. They'll pick you up in the brand new Mercedes. They'll take you to the coolest restaurants. They'll go get drunk with you. They'll do all kinds of crazy stuff because they love meeting their customers, and it's a really big deal in their culture. You'll take hundreds of pictures, and it'll be all over their website and everything because they're very proud of that. Another thing you also want to do is always check supplierblacklist.com. Supplierblacklist.com is where a lot of sellers will report problems that they've had with different manufacturers. So make sure your supplier is not on supplierblacklist.com. So those are just some of the things that you want to ask. There's plenty more questions, and I'm sure later in this module, Kian, who's going to be talking about sourcing in China, is going to mention a few other things that you should ask. But I just want to give you this groundwork of some things that you should be thinking about when you're sourcing. So I hope this has been helpful for you, and look forward to seeing you in the next module.